Hello, everyone, and welcome to What's at Stake, a Penta podcast with Matt McDonald, Stacy Kerr, Conall McDevitt, and me, your host, Andy Whitehouse. The four of us represent Penta at Davos earlier this month for the World Economic Forum. And so we thought we'd share some of our reflections on the week's events and the impact of global gatherings like this for companies and for their stakeholders. And we'll talk a little bit about whether Davos works for the world of 2024. So thank you to Matt, to Stacy, and to Conall for joining me today.
Hi, Andy.
Hello. So to start us off, I'd love to hear each of your impressions on Davos 2024 as an event. I've been lucky to go to the meeting a couple of times in the past. I'm very interested to hear your takes, as some of you came to it with much fresher eyes. What surprised you about the event? What was most memorable? What did you see on the inside that perhaps the media commentary didn't pick up?
Andy, I have to correct you first, though. By a couple of times, Andy was making his 16th trip to Davos, right, Andy?
Something like that. I think I lost count.
But for new listeners to Andy and the Penta team, Andy, you spent time when you were at both KPMG and IBM in Davos. Is that right?
Yeah, at McKinsey, at IBM, and at Willis. So yeah, I definitely put the vet into Davos veteran. But so you tell me, Stacy, what were your impressions of Davos in 2024?
Well, for people that have never been, and I think for probably those listening who have been would agree, there is just no replacement for the scale of people in one place having interesting, thoughtful conversations, really from all parts of the globe. And that piece is, I think, I'm not sure there is another forum where you get that caliber and collection of people together in one place and really pretty singularly focused on engaging with each other in that space. So I think it is said about Davos. I think that is one thing that struck me, is just how true that was. I mean, whether we were walking down the street, running into people that we knew, or just meeting really, really interesting new people, it is a huge, huge, valuable use of time, given the scale and the quantity and caliber of people.
Thanks, Stacy. Matt, what was most memorable for you from the event?
I mean, I've been once before. I would say that there was, as a convening of conventional wisdom, it was all AI all the time. There was a little, I mean, AI will be profound. We did our event on AI, so I'm in a bit of a glass house on that one, but I would say that the thoroughness of the AI, if software is eating the world, then AI ate WEF this year, and it might have been a little overwrought just in terms of there are a lot of other topics out there. I do think that within the topics of the Congress Center itself, there was probably a little more diversity in the panels than the kind of ensuing, like the surround sound of the rest of the town. So, I mean, that was kind of first, second, and third priorities in discussion. I'm not sure that's wrong, but it definitely had certainly an echo chamber effect this year. I think broadly from the last time I went, kind of pre-pandemic, I would say that the progression of the WEF takeover of Davos itself in the town proceeds apace. I'm not sure. At some point, it just feels like there will be no stores or restaurants left, is that everything will be taken over by corporate storefronts. But it's always, as Stacy said, it's always a great convening to meet with people and, hear some provocative ideas and all the rest of it.
Thanks, Matt. And we'll definitely want to come back to the Penta panel on AI, where you played a starring role. Conall, you lead off outside of North America from your vantage point, based in Europe, but thinking about clients in other parts of the world as well. What was your take on Davos 2024?
I suppose it's the uniqueness of the gathering. Walking into a repurposed golf club bar on a Wednesday evening and seeing Tony Blair, John Kerry, and Sting sitting at a table enjoying a pint, only then to turn the other way and meet the leaders of some of the largest banks in the world and other very significant public and private figures globally. That doesn't happen every day of the week. And I would venture to say it doesn't happen in any other town at any other point of the year except in Davos. And that makes it special. And it creates its own atmosphere, which I think is very interesting. There's nearly a democracy about the level at which people engage. There's an openness. There's a willingness to talk, which would not be there if you met these people privately or individually in their native environments. And those things should not be taken lightly. They're unique opportunities for people in great positions of power and authority globally to find space and time to speak frankly. And, I've loads of other anecdotes from the week, bumping into Gordon Brown on the street and popping into a pretty intimate conversation with Sam Altman talking about the threats to democracy of his own invention. And from Penta's point of view, I think it's very exciting that we kind of are able, first of all, to participate and that we are accepted into this global community, because you have to have achieved a certain amount of success to be accepted, but also that we are very much in the zeitgeist of that community, living as we do at the intersection of traditional politics and business, but also enjoying the disruption that, a huge amount of data and insights has brought to our business, and the potential that AI is going to bring to our business and our industry in the months and years ahead. So for me, it was a combination of being frozen, never thinking that such a bunch of apparently important people could find fighting over food such an important daily obsession, and being utterly blown away, both intellectually and kind of from an opportunity to meet people point of view. It was really quite the thing. And for me as the first timer, not something I'll forget lightly. Very interesting.
Andy, can I flip it back on you, and maybe with your veteran status, I am curious what struck you this year that was maybe different than last year's, or what were your takeaways on this year's convening?
Yeah, thanks, Stacey. Of course. So I, as you said earlier, I've been going for a bit now. The first year I went was in 2006, and each of you made points that I think are really spot on as I think about how the event has changed over the last 20 years or so. So the first thing that's just incredibly striking is how many people now are showing up for the event, and how big the fringe festival that takes place in town outside of the Congress Center has begun. I would guess more than 1,000 events organized by companies and countries and nonprofit organizations. And so there's such a rich conversation all over town. Matt, you're right. It felt like maybe the AI had decided it would take over.
So it did feel like that the AI had taken over the agenda, at least for the Fringe Festival running around the town outside of the Congress Center, but just an enormous number of events organized by companies and by countries, nonprofit organizations, foundations, and the like over the course of the week. I think one other thing that's striking, Matt, you just said how basically every piece of infrastructure in the town seems to have been taken over by a company or a country to sort of present its brand to the world. One thing very striking to me compared to the past was how many countries had decided to go down that route. So from all over the world that felt like this was an opportunity for them to present their national brand and to have a physical location in which political leaders, business leaders from that part of the world were able to tell their story to the people participating in Davos. So it has gone from being a sort of I guess a traditional conference to almost a platform on which organizations of all kinds and countries are showing up and telling their story to the world. So sort of to the point you made at the start, Stacey, it's a super important place, I think, for us to be.
Andy, one thing I would say, just picking up on everybody's also, and Conall brought us a little bit of the celebrity of Davos, which, back here in the States, that's oftentimes what people hear about from Davos is the celebrities that come to sort of, press their cause or to come and jump on. But I think if you've never been, and I think a huge takeaway from Davos is people come to Davos to do business, whether it's businesses, countries, people like us, that they are coming to do business. And I was especially struck by, we had a pretty large number of clients that were there. You referenced the event that we did that we'll get into. So, our reason for going was the clients we had, the connections to people who we've been talking to around the globe, and having people in one place to really share conversations with all parts of our business. But I do think people are really in Davos looking for the right mix of teams to solve these big, huge problems that they're facing from a business perspective, and whether that's cross-country cooperation diplomatically for businesses, whether it's the groups of outside consulting teams that they're putting together. Everybody is very, very focused on utilizing the intellectual and business capacity that is happening over those 5 days to really knit together the right group of teams to solve these really, really big, dynamic forces that businesses are facing globally.
Yeah, I think that's right, Stacey. And I know I was, at least on Conall's point earlier, I sort of imagined Conall's life was all about being in bars with Tony Blair and Sting and John Kerry. So I was a little surprised by that. But to that point, what do you, perhaps Conall, if you want to go for this one, if you were helping next year a client think about how they should prepare for that environment that Stacey was just describing, what do you think what should the strategy be for going to an event like this? What are the tactics that are going to make you and your organization effective during what is a really packed and kind of exhausting week?
Yeah, I think the big message would be that you need a very clear strategy for Davos. So whether you're a large multinational or you're an NGO or you're a state, there will be an official theme to the conference. This year it was AI, but there will be business that you will want to do. And I think you need to have a really clear view in your own mind as to why you're going there, who you want to connect with, and what and for what purpose. And I think today, as we're recording this on, at the end of January, I think there's evidence of one group having had a pretty clear mission, actually, when they went to Davos. And it's in the British papers this morning. And ironically, it's the British Labour Party. So the British Labour Party chose to go to Davos, and they put the shadow chancellor, Rachel Reeves, front and center. And it is clear now from the news reporting today that their mission was to engage with global banks. And they clearly wanted to talk to the global banks about what they call their financial services plan, which they've published this morning. And at the heart of that is a decision not to reverse the Conservative government's decision to lift the bonus cap on bankers in the City of London. I won't bore the listeners with all the details around that, but if you're running a global bank and you have a big team of successful investment bankers sitting in London, this matters in terms of your talent retention, in terms of London remaining a global financial centre. And it is pretty clear, with the benefit of hindsight, that that's what Labour were about at Davos. They were not about talking about AI. They were about getting in the room with the leaders of the world's biggest banks to reassure them that they were going to back the City of London all the way, and that they did not intend to in any way undermine the future of the City of London, in the years ahead under a Labour government. And I think that's a really interesting example of just one organisation clearly having a purpose and going for it. And I think for any organisation that has a global footprint, the same opportunity exists. There is no other, as I said, place in the world where you will gather everyone you could possibly want to speak to in the one place. And you need to make choices. You need to decide who you're going to meet, what you're going to meet them about. But the good news is they'll be there. The other thing that I would take away, and this was a piece of advice you offered up and was offered up in some meetings with friends of yours, Andy, who are veterans of this, you need to start planning Davos nearly now. So, it is the spring of the year before Davos that you are going to be thinking about what you're going to get out of it, what your objectives are going to be, who you're going to be targeting, what the shape of your program is going to be. But my takeaway is, if you're a serious global business or global organization, you have something you need to communicate to the world's most important stakeholders, you could do a lot worse than invest time and energy in doing so in Davos.
Thanks, Conall. And that story about Labour is definitely one that's only just surfaced. That was a little more under the radar, I'd say, during the course of the week. So it's super interesting.
I will say Rachel Reeves was a hot topic at many of the events that I went to, especially some of the events that were focused on corporate women. Everybody was like, is Rachel Reeves here? Is Rachel Reeves here?
Yeah.
So there was the Stings of the world are not the only stars in Davos.
And I think they put the work in, Stace, right? They had done their work, the Labour Party, preparing for positioning Rachel Reeves front and centre. And, she outshone the Chancellor of the Exchequer, who, by the way, in the British press, the week of Davos was getting criticised for only turning up on Thursday morning. I bumped into him in the corridor, shuttling between meetings, but he was playing catch up. And there goes. I think it's a fantastic case to just show how this gathering can be used to really promote a cause or a particular agenda.
So before we go to a quick break, let me ask each of you, maybe Matt, if you want to go first, setting aside AI, which was obviously a really big theme, and we'll come back to in part two. What else would you say was your key kind of theme or trend that you think clients should be watching out for this year based on the conversation that you heard, the conversations you were in while you were in Switzerland?
I mean, I would say that the number two topic was probably kind of year of elections in general. And that surfaced in a number of different ways. But I would say that, everybody knows that it's an election year coming up. And at the same time, I'm not sure that a ton of people have focused on that fact until the clock kind of turned over to 2024. And all of a sudden, there's a bit more thinking about what that entails, that it obviously entwined with the AI conversation a little bit, but also kind of corporate brand and corporate reputation and how you prepare for some of that. There's obviously a lot of, geopolitical, tension, risk, war, all these sorts of things. And I think that was, if you had the yin and the yang of the kind of AI opportunity, the flip side was kind of this, I don't know, it had a quality of people waiting on the year of elections to play out and see what the world looks like after the fact. And it does, I was reflecting on this a little bit. One of the pieces that kind of came up, or the topics as in some of my conversations, is the fact that, here in the States, the one thing that we know for certain is that we will have a lame duck president elected at the end of the year. And it does have a bit of a quality of that feels emblematic for the year of elections that's happening, despite all of the people around the world that are going to vote, and it is in the billions. It also feels like we're in still the tail end of one era and haven't quite turned the page on a lot of change to come. So I think it's still kind of a bit of a restive period where there's going to be a lot of tension over the coming year. And I think at least on the corporate side, there was plenty of conversation about how you anticipate that and plan for that and think around the corner on some of the tensions that will inevitably play out over the coming months.
Yeah, Matt, just one point on that is, and I think, I think this is the largest quantity of elections in human history, right, this year. And I think, again, from a U.S. perspective, what often gets reported out is a predictive element of, who did business think will win elections? Well, on the ground, there is, maybe 1% predictive, and it's 99% resignation and planning, as you say, Matt. Like, people are very much in the mode of, we resigned, even from a U.S. perspective, to the fact that, as you point out, Matt, we will have a lame duck, a president in either case, whether it's Biden or Trump, who will be in his final term. And much more of the business conversation was far less about any panic about who that will be, and much more resignation to what that will mean for business and how they move forward.
Yeah. I think
you have to pick something other than elections, because
I think climate is still the elephant in the room. Honestly, I think there was a lot of noise in the margins about how climate was not on the agenda anymore, and I think it. You had all told me, like, Davos's topic of the year, topic du jour, whatever the world's talking about in June, Davos convenes on in November. And so I guess you come to the AI debate, but like underneath it all was a huge climate debate. And when you looked at the high street in Davos, you saw some of the world's most interesting, exciting emerging economies, or emerged economies, whose entire proposition at Davos was about their ability to pivot from being petrochemical states to being post-petrochemical state. So the Saudis were there in huge force, platforming their NEOM project, which is, this great project to build the world's first net zero city. As I think someone reminded us, nearly every major Indian region, as well as the Indian government, were there. And again, front and center for them is that they're a huge technology sort of powerhouse globally, but they're also, at the fulcrum of climate debate and transition. And I think it will be very interesting in the years ahead to see how the World Economic Forum and Davos is able to straddle that really critically important debate alongside whatever the topical issue of the year might be. But that for me was a bit of the elephant in the room.
Great. Thanks, Conall. Well, let's take a quick break so I can grab a bit of extra cheese fondue, and we'll be back with you all
I missed the fondue
in a second.
Penta is the world's first comprehensive stakeholder solutions firm. We are a one-stop shop for the intelligence and strategy leaders need to assess a company's reputation and make decisions that improve their positioning. As executives in the C-suite must account for a growing set of engaged stakeholders, all with distinct, fast-changing demands, Penta provides real-time intelligence and strategy solutions. We work with clients solving complex global challenges across a variety of industries. Our clients span technology, financial services, energy, healthcare, and more. To learn more about how Penta can support your company, check out our website at pentagroup.co, our Twitter at pentagrp, or find us on LinkedIn at Penta Group.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to What's at Stake. As we mentioned earlier in part one at the World Economic Forum this year, Penta, along with our friends at Worth Media Group, teamed up to put on a panel event focused on how artificial intelligence will disrupt the working lives and the roles of the kind of people who show up for Davos, to explore what the impact might be in the C-suite and at the top of organizations of the broad application of AI. And we were really pleased that the panel got a lot of attention. We were written up by our friends at Politico, and our colleague Matt, who's on the podcast with us today, was our panelist for the event, joined by co-panelists Ravin G. Thiessen, who's a senior partner at Mercer, and Valerie Boulier, the chief sales and marketing officer for the Adecco Group based in Switzerland. So maybe, Matt, if we can start with you. Do you want to just give us a sense for the conversation on the panel, where we took things and some of the things that you as a group of panelists concluded?
Yeah, we were trying to be a bit provocative. I think that there's a lot of discussion around AI disruption or augmentation among, I don't know, if people could compare AI to the disruptive equivalent for white collar workers, what kind of trade and globalization has been for blue collar manufacturing workers over time. There's fear, reskilling, a lot of those types of conversations, but we actually tried to center it a little bit more, as you said, Andy, on the C-suite and companies and what does it mean and how do you think about that stuff. I would say that, from the conversation, some of the pieces that popped out to me were probably, AI should make analytics and understanding the mechanics of the company comparatively easy. I don't think it is yet kind of a substitute for the storytelling role that especially modern leaders of companies really need to engage with. Even in our work, it's always interesting. When we talk to CEOs or work with CEOs, is that I'm always reminded that most of the time their qualifications is that they ran a very successful P&L within their company. Talking to reporters on the record is not typically part of the skill set that you build as you go to the top. So it, like with many new jobs, it really does change the job. But I think that kind of vision and storytelling, that the human elements of being a leader will be at a premium because of AI. But I think it's also going to change a lot. One of the things that Andy, you and I had talked about prior to the panel was the idea around, kind of an AI coach or, an AI, bot for managers themselves, where, what if the typical span of control, right? That idea that any given person can probably manage 6 to 9 people, and somewhere north of that, it you might be duplicative, or somewhere south of that, you might be duplicative. Somewhere north of that, things get out of control. But, if AI can play a coach to a person working for you, and you say to the AI, hey, how should I think about preparing this meeting for this meeting? That's, best practices on that stuff it's not super dependent on one person. So, if the span of controls of managers moves from like high single digits to mid double digits, that would be a radical shift in organizational design. You would have much flatter organizations. Whether that's possible or not, who knows? But that's the type of disruption that we could see for managers and leaders of organizations. Just one more that we chatted about was, from an interviewing perspective, we talked about, consulting firm that has, I would say, in talking to them, it's still early stage, but a chat bot that gives prospective interviewees a case. And that has pretty profound implications for talent and recruiting and how you think about that stuff. In theory, for a round one interview, you could interview as many people as apply. There doesn't have to be a resume screen. So for talent discovery and really finding talent wherever it is, that could likewise have profound implications in terms of talent discovery and then skill set matching and finding jobs that are really a fit for people and what they will excel at and be happy at. So we tried to, probe on some of those types of things, thinking about it from that dimension. I think that, it'll be interesting to see how some of this plays out in the coming years, because I think that we can all see like, writing memos and what that means has changed a lot. But I think there's probably coming a lot deeper change within organizations and how organizations are structured and how people relate to each other and what those relationships look like. And that I think we only have the hints of now.
Yeah, I think it was a really good conversation, and it was obviously refreshing to be focused somewhere else other than the kind of, is the AI going to take over humanity and ruin the world?
AI in the future.
which got plenty of airtime. So some of those sort of economic and managerial implications were fun to explore. Stacey Connell, I guess one last thing on sort of themes and topics I wanted to ask you both, which is, I think in some ways the conversation in Davos can be a sort of an interesting barometer for how leaders are thinking about the economy for the year ahead. So what was, maybe from your respective geographic viewpoints, what was your sense for, should we be thinking that things are going to work out well for Europe and its economies over the course of the year ahead? How do you think, Stacey, this looks for the US based on what you heard in Davos?
Well, I think the most important thing, and again, there was less predictive in the conversations and more planning to different scenarios. I definitely don't think that the U.S. economy was the dominant uncertainty in the crowd, for sure. And I think, Andy, I was a little more struck by, again, the uniqueness of Davos was how much of, there was never a single conversation that I was in that was just about one part of the world. So it was less about what's going to happen in the U.S. economy or what's going to happen in the European economy. And I'd be curious if Conall had the same, but what is going to happen, in the interplay of all of these things, even looking at, Asian markets and what's happening there. So I think it was, again, I was struck less by people predicting what's going to happen and more by using the opportunity to get multiple perspectives to inform their planning of different scenarios pending whatever does happen. Conall?
Yeah, I think thinking about Europe, my sense was people were less pessimistic than they had been in previous years, and certainly the sentiment, I would say, was more one of kind of cautious optimism. I think there's concern about China, and that's a theme that just comes up all the time about how that will pan out this year and its ability to recover. And only this past week there's been a very interesting ruling in the Hong Kong Supreme Court, which could have quite a material impact on the Chinese economy. And that will be, I think, something that people will be watching very, very closely. And that was coming up. Fair bit of discussion around India as well. Not so much about the elections. I think it's assumed that the BJP will hold power, but where the Indian economy goes in the next 5 to 6 years, I think people are taking India very, very, very seriously now as an economic actor on the world stage. And fair play to India, they turned up both on the high street in Davos for the Fringe, and by all accounts at the World Economic Forum itself to sort of meet those expectations.
Wonderful. Thank you. So last question from me. So Davos is now well into its 50s. The meeting in various forms has existed for more than 50 years. So dramatically older than the four of us. I wanted to ask each of you this sort of fundamental question about whether you think Davos and meetings like it really work in the world of 2024. Is it important, and does it still work? Who fancies a go at that one?
I'll go first. I'll say absolutely. This is one of these things. It's like my time in the U.S. Congress. There used to be a lot of critique around what we called CODELs and these international trips of delegations of the United States congressional members going into other parts of the world and having conversations about business and diplomacy. Very easy to criticize from the outside, completely different experience on the inside, and an irreplicable value. So I think absolutely it has value. I think it should continue. I think the place that Davos should move to make it ever more valuable is to, if we could say, follow the Penta lead and get deeper on these conversations around the fringe, go deeper, bring these topics, but bring some real point of view and advance the conversations a little further. Use the opportunity of all these great people in one place to actually advance thinking a little bit further. I still think there's opportunity for people to come in and shape the conversations with a clear perspective in Davos.
Yeah, I agree. I think that there's a ton of value there. The meeting of minds and people who have great responsibility across the globe is always a good thing. I mean, even for Penta, a lot of the time, the way we articulate our value to clients is helping them understand stakeholders and helping the stakeholders understand them. And real understanding happens when you get together in person. So I think it's all to the good. I will say that 50 years is an impressive run. And these meetings will never go away. There's always a need and a desire for people to connect. Whether it's at WEF or something else is more ephemeral. 50 years is a good track record, but the value is always in the convening and the people who decide to go and the reasons that they decide to go, and the meeting of the people, whether it's in Davos or in other places. That's where the value really sits. And for WEF, that's the goal, is to continue that hard to quantify value and momentum.
Yeah, I'd agree. I don't think I have too much to add to that.
That's not the spirit of Davos, though, is that everything has been said, but not everyone has said it. So you got to say something.
Well, I think you mentioned the role of the World Economic Forum, Matt, and I think that's an interesting one to potentially think about and explore. They've been around for as long as globalization's been around in its current incarnation, and there's no question that globalization has shaped the world up until about 8 or 9 years ago or whenever, and there's been an unquestionable debate has kicked off about whether globalization is the way forward. If I were in the World Economic Forum, I'd want to own that space. And that means possibly being a slightly more point of view organization than just a convening organization. Can I imagine a world where we retreat behind our borders, no matter how big or small they may be, and we hope that we can prosper in isolation? Personally, I can't, but I do acknowledge very many people. And to the point of, the Penta thesis, there is serious work to be done about how relationships are maintained and grown, and how you understand and study those around you, whether it's in a globalized framework or in a more isolationist kind of frame. In that sense, yeah, it'll be fascinating to watch and see how the World Economic Forum adapts to the world around it in the coming years.
Very good. Well, Matt, Stacey, Conall, you now have permission to put away your snow boots and crampons for another year. Thank you so much for joining the show today. To our listeners, remember to like and subscribe wherever you listen to your podcasts and follow us on LinkedIn at Penta Group. I'm your host, Andy Whitehouse, and as always, thanks for listening to What's at Stake. See you next time.